Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Double Delight by Julie Castle. And this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. April Love, Chapter 1. I desperately need to get laid, April Brooks decided, climbing into a brush stool in the back booth of Red's Barn Grill. Resting my evening sandal-shod feet on the table's brass rail, I surveyed the dancing couples with an envious eye. It should have been easy back in my sleepy hometown, but it wasn't. I didn't want permanence, just a real man to finally make me feel like a real woman. Was that too much to ask? Apparently, the universe said yes, I realized, letting out a sigh. Men might be cheating dogs in general, but they did have their uses, like ridding a 28-year-old woman of her virginity. I wanted to find out what I was missing. Ached to, actually, if those hollow longings between my legs were anything to go by. I needed a dream lover for one night. Smoothing my new blue dress out on my lap, I figured it definitely beat my usual garb of lab coats and business suits. They belonged to the old me, the ex-dowdy assistant college professor. This sexy new dress fit the me I wanted to become. I was determined to reinvent myself as the owner of a successful bed and breakfast, and as a woman with at least some semblance of a sex life. The jukebox twanged a song about friends in low places. That about summed up Reds, and it fit my mood. I hadn't been able to resist coming here after leaving a friend's wedding reception, needing a distraction. Twin calamities had flattened me like a 1-2 punch 2 weeks ago, and I was still trying to get over them. First, my Aunt Sadie had been incapacitated with a stroke. A week later, my personal life and career had imploded when I walked in on my fiancé and mentor, Edmund Jones, having sex with one of his grad students. Humiliated, I'd instantly realized our 3-year platonic relationship had been nothing but a sham to him. It was a shock to realize what a fool I'd been. For 3 years, I'd been tamping down my sexual desires, saving myself for a man that didn't even want me. I'd coddled him, supported him, and helped him with his work. In short, I'd been more of a servant than a girlfriend. Edmund had even claimed to suffer from writer's block, and I helped him get published. The truth was, I'd written the articles because he was too lazy, and he'd claimed all the credit. I hadn't minded at the time, feeling like we were a team, and besides, he needed it for tenure. Walking in on him, his trousers around his ankles, and Tiffany kneeling in front of him, her lips swallowing his small red penis as he made disgusting grunting sounds, had vividly taught me how stupid I'd been. I'd resigned my position rather than work under the man anymore. Moving back home to run the Rosebud had been another move in the right direction, but in some ways it had only made me feel more discontent with my lot in life. I didn't fit in here either. Seeing my old high school friends paired off reminded me that life was quickly passing me by, which explained my showing up at Red's tonight more demoralized than ever. When my best friend Ellen joked that I was so uptight I squeaked, I knew it was painfully true. It was high time I shed my cursed virginity. Needed a dream lover for one night to make me feel whole. Of course, he needed to be good at sex. That was a given. I definitely required a man who could perform. Eyeing the selection of guys present, I suddenly had an epiphany. Given my academic background, it would be easiest to approach my deflowering as a research project. I could do this. The perfect candidate's qualifications were quite simple and easy to define. He had to be reasonably good-looking. No drop-dead gorgeous men need apply, but he did need to be able to wake my slumbering hormones. He had to be very good at sex, and most of all, he couldn't be clingy. After the way Edmund had wailed and pursued me after I'd left him, I couldn't handle clinging. This would amount to a one-time occurrence, so I wouldn't run the risk of getting attached to him and getting my heart broken. A burst of masculine laughter from the head of the bar snagged my attention, sending a little fission of heat up my spine. Good God, I recognized that rugged laugh, that powerful stance. Viewing him from the back, I still knew him by heart. And why not? I'd had a huge crush on him as a kid. Billy Shepard. Another visceral thrill shot through me. 5 years older and the town's rebel without a cause, he still looked good enough to eat. Not classically handsome, no, he was tall, muscular, dangerous, and something about him made me shiver right down to my toes. Now, Billy Shepard undoubtedly knew how to do it, and I'd bet my bottom dollar he could perform like a super stud. My gaze swept up his long, jean-clad legs to focus on his sexy tight butt for a long beat. Biting my lip, I slowly let my gaze drift up his muscular frame to focus on his wavy coal-black hair. Still a bit too long to be considered proper. It brushed his collar. I itched to run my fingers through it. If his front looked half as good as I remembered, I'd just found my man. My father would have said he was a renegade. My mother would have referred to him as too wild for his own good. I thought he was just plain yummy. He turned, and my heart fluttered, slamming against my chest. He was still sexy as sin and twice as good-looking. As if he'd felt my stare, he looked straight at me. He'd grown into a hard-edged, handsome man. I conceded. His eyes a dark midnight blue, his nose straight and his chin strong. Billy's mouth, oh my, his mouth conjured up all kinds of forbidden fantasies inside me. I wanted to taste it. Perfect, I whispered, and he grinned like he'd read my lips. I looked away, flustered as my body burned. Will Shepard stood stock still at the bar. The only thing moving was his cock swelling behind the fly of his jeans. Little April Brooks was giving a hard-on from across the room. Not so little anymore, he amended. She was nicely filled out from her sweetly rounded ass to her full breasts, enhanced by the silky dress she wore. They were more than a handful for him, and he had big hands. He'd noticed her the moment she'd entered, tracking her movement across the bar. She was a lethal combination. Half the men in the joint sat up and took notice. He knew precisely why she was back in sleepy Landis Falls. She was the new proprietress of the Rosebud, one of his firm's biggest construction jobs. He'd been in the midst of the renovation when Sadie Brooks had had a stroke 2 weeks back. Now, little April Brooks was back to take the helm. Watching the telltale blush on her face, he figured he had something else he'd like her to take hold of. All 12 inches. Everything about her was a turn-on, from her red hair to her sparkling green eyes. She was unforgettable. When she was 5, he'd chased her with worms and playfully pelted her with snowballs. When she was 12, she'd been a gangly girl with pigtails playing the flute in the middle school band. He'd been just off to the army when she'd been in high school. He remembered the shy former nerd she used to be. Funny, but he hadn't thought about her for years. He watched her nibble her full lower lip as she peeked back at him, and he groaned. He knew when a woman wanted him. Yeah, he had plans for those luscious lips. Stalking her away, he acknowledged to himself he was acting like a damned fool, but it didn't slow his stride. He was respectable now, a businessman. His well-respected construction company belonged to the Chamber of Commerce, for Pete's sake. After his divorce 2 years back, he'd been very cautious about the women he chose to bed. But damn, like a moth drawn to an irresistible flame, he made his way to her side. I watched Billy cross the floor, his eyes never leaving mine. What now? Considering how busy academic life had kept me, I hadn't learned how to flirt well, and then he was there, sidling up to me, and I stopped thinking. Breathing in the mingled scents of sandalwood and man, my heart fluttered again. He seemed to take up the entire space, the noise and people around us receding into insignificance. He leaned in close. Hello, pretty lady. Pretty? Me? Probably just pickup lines, I decided, and promptly got lost in his deep blue eyes. Hi, I'm, Andrea. Yeah, Andrea Bates. This would be easier for me to do if I remained a mystery woman, like an actress playing a role. I could act sexy if I put my mind to it. I held out my hand for him to shake, watching his reaction to my blatant lie. There was a small twitch of his manly lips as he broke into a friendly smile. Will Shepard, he said, setting his beer bottle on the table to shake my hand. I felt a surge of excitement as his big hand enfolded mine. My gaze darted to the big bulge in his pants, obvious behind the placket of his tight jeans, and I gulped. He was definitely the right choice. Face heating, I looked up, giving him what I hoped was a confident smile. After a long moment, he let go of my hand and picked up his beer. His thick fingers curled around the long neck bottle. They were big and rough from manual labor. How would they feel on my sensitive nipples, on that hot spot between my legs that was growing heavy and dewy as I stared at his hand? Tracking my gaze back to his face, I watched him take a sip of his beer, his throat opening and closing as he swallowed. Unable to hold it in any longer, I blurted, Will Shepard, would you like to take me to bed? As my words registered, he choked on his beer for a minute. His eyes flashed, his mouth twitched again, and the bulge in his pants grew bigger. Yes, I'd made the right choice. He edged nearer, his crotch bumping my hip. You don't beat around the bush, do you, Andrea? He asked with a grin. Burning where he touched me, I looked up at him, studying the slight flush on his face. He was just as affected by the contact. It was a balm to my wounded femininity. I believe in being direct. Well? Sure, he said, his voice a husky bedroom rumble. I'd love to take you to bed, precious.